Hello humans, welcome to this appendix of Maya where I decided to basically add a couple of things that I kind of omitted on the way here. Basically, I was initially planning for us to create our assets and then export them to Unreal and just make our game there and then maybe do some other things like texturing afterwards. However, I've come to the conclusion that it's much better to simply go through the whole pipeline before we jump into Unreal, for the simple reason that our game is fairly simple. Well, yeah, I kind of just repeated myself, but basically, due to the fact that the project that I'm working on, that we're working on, is not something huge or big, so to speak. It's just a simple game, a mediocre game. That's what we're aiming for here. We can afford to complete our assets and then work with them in Unreal and program them in other words, it is not like a big game. In a bigger game, if you had like imagine if you were making Half-Life or Doom or anything of this matter of this sort that required level design, etc., you'd be initially blocking out the level like we did in Unreal first with the brushes, and then you would go ahead and create your modular bits like walls and doors and add them to your level as you delete the brushes. You would also probably not be using a fully textured model. You probably have something basic such as a regular Unreal mannequin or something, and would be having some default animations, not something very high level, but in general, if you're working with characters, you'd want to have some basic animation working for you. Obviously, things like lip syncing and even probably dialogue, whatever game you're working on, right? You wouldn't have that in the preliminary stage of development. You would be adding that as you go. However, in our case, we will be going through the whole process here, and I wanted to amend a few things before we go into this, because like I said, I kind of omitted a couple of important points, especially when considering the pipeline we're going through when it comes to UVs and topology. Now, for this example, I'm simply going to go ahead and create a cylinder, and I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder on the z-axis, and I want you to take a look at something. I'm going to go ahead and add a cap here. If I can click on this damn thing. By the way, I'm using my 2018, which has some some cool new features. Let me just add the round cap and maybe some subdivisions to said cap. Okay, so here we go. We've got this thing here going for us, and I just wanted to, I'm going to create another one, by the way, so that you can understand what I'm talking about here. Now, first of all, when it comes to the pipeline, we're going to be exporting this into Painter, right? In other words, we need to have our model prepared. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make a video on model preparation separately, but while you're UVing, you need to understand that whenever you're defining hard or soft edges, for example, if we take a look here, obviously this edge is hard, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle. I got to go into edge mode for this. Can we go into edge mode, please? Yes. So I'm going to toggle this soft and hard edges, and remember, notice that this edge is hard and these edges are soft. Now, what this means is, for reasons unexplained yet, just think of it this way. Whenever you have a hard edge, okay, like in this case here, we have a hard edge. Whenever this happens, you always want to have a UV seam running along this edge, okay? Meaning that this object here, sorry, this side panel here, like all of this cylindrical shape on the side, must be on a separate UV shell, and this cap here must be on a separate UV shell as well. Reason being is this is basically for lighting calculations and normal map baking, and I'm going to explain to you what these maps are and how they work and why they're needed. But just know this, okay? Follow this practice. This is like the #1 golden rule when it comes to UV mapping. usually anyway, and it is essentially whenever you have a hard edge, you need to have a UV seam on that hard edge. However, that's not a two-way door. Okay, so if you have a soft edge, if you have a UV seam, you don't have to have a hard edge on it. All right, you can have a soft edge. Like this could be a soft edge easily. So I'm going to go ahead and pop off the UV editor here, just so that we know, just so that I can tell you what I'm talking about here. Now notice this is a correct UV layout for this particular object, because the hard edge is over here. If you notice, I'm just going to turn on the what was the shading here. I'm sorry, this is like the new version. I need to figure out what the shaded UV shells were. No, the right mouse button. There we go. So if we go ahead, and I'm just going to pop this over here. Go on. There we go. If we go ahead and look at this now, this is a soft edge, but it doesn't. It has a seam on it, which is absolutely fine. However, if there is a hard edge, it must have a seam on it 100%. Not only that, but whenever you have a hard edge, such as this in this example here, it will almost always be beneficial for you to bevel it. Okay, that is again to help the map generation process. You know, onto the UVs, such as details, etc. Because, like I said, we're going to be baking from a high poly onto a low poly. In this case, this would be the low poly. The high poly wouldn't need the UVs, obviously, because we're not going to be using it. But the low poly definitely needs it. So if we take a look over here, this is definitely something that you can work with. Now, if I go ahead and select this other object here, notice that we have, I'm going to turn on the edges again. Notice that we have the exact same setup here, right? It is not a requirement for this object to have the UVs set up in the exact same way, because depending on what you want, for example, if you grab this edge loop over here and you decide to harden that, if you decide to harden this edge, notice that the lighting now is calculated differently because of the hardness of this edge. Therefore, you need to actually have a UV cut on this edge. All right, you need to have these two shells separate. So, like in this case, you would probably go into, I wonder if I could go into UVs through the right mouse button. Is it even possible? No. What if I go ahead and select the UV shell, and then I go into, 3D cut and sew, and now I need to go into my, into my edge mode. And now let's say I would go ahead and simply cut along here, and now I have a separate UV shell, and this is definitely what you want. I'm going to cut this as well over here. Whoa, not like this, like this. Okay, and this means that essentially my UVs will be distributed accordingly, because I have a hard shell over here, a hard edge over here. Now, not necessarily would this be required, because like I said, due to the fact that this is a rounded shape, the fact that you have an edge here should not mean that it is automatically hardened. It basically all depends on what you're doing, right? If you, let's say, grab this edge and you just scale it out, now this edge would be hard, because it's a hard, there's like a big angle difference over here. I'm going to show this to you in another video and explain to you why having hard edges actually increases your poly count, because the renderer will be splitting these vertices in two, essentially separating your mesh in order to render it. This is what's going to happen on the GPU level, but as it is right now, just think of it this way: if you ever have a hard edge, you always have a UV seam on it. And not only that, once you have your UV seams done, such as in this case, for example, let me just go ahead and grab these shells. Let's say I'm going to grab this, grab these two shells, and no, I'm going to grab the whole thing, and I'm just going to unfold them. Just give it a moment here. This new tool is really handy, especially for visualization purposes, so that you can understand what's going on. I'm currently unfolding the whole thing. It might take a while because it's using the Unfold 3D. Obviously, for fast iteration, you probably would want to use the legacy system. I don't know if there's a way to set it up, but I'm not really that much into iterating in my UVs, at least for now. So if you take a look here, this is what our current setup is. Maybe this is not the best. Maybe I'd have to straighten this out and lay them out better here. But because we have separate shells, this is obviously our, if we take a look here, this is obviously our cut over here, right? This is what we're looking at. And at the top here, this is the other bit, which is smaller naturally, and then the bottom bit is over here if it does not crash. There we go. So this is what the whole story is with the UVs. Just think of it this way, that whenever you have a hard edge, in fact, don't define hard edges at all. Just go into your UV cutting tool. Whenever you cut the UVs, think of it as not cutting UVs, but defining hard edges. Because once you have that, right, let me just turn this off for a second. And let's say I select this hard edge over here and I just smooth it again. Let's say I soften it, okay? And I'm gonna delete the history on this thing. If I decide, because like I said, it was a requirement to have hard edges on UV seams, hard edges on UV seams, but not vice versa. That means that now if I didn't have this harden, I'm gonna have to go ahead and select like this edge and harden it. But because Maya's 2018 new feature is amazing, I really love it, you can basically select the whole object and then go into soften harden edges and just soften harden and use texture borders, and this will basically soften / harden your edge, you know, depending on where the texture borders are, in other words your UV seams. Now obviously, like I said, this is not ideal because sometimes you might get problems like these, so essentially just select your edges and simply soften them. Like I said, there's no problem with having a soft edge on a seam. There is a problem when you have a hard edge on a seam. When you don't have a hard edge on a seam. When you don't have a seam on a hard edge. Jesus, I'm starting to confuse you guys because my mouth is starting to speak different things. But one last thing, obviously, you would bevel this. Something like this, perhaps. And always whenever you bevel, try to do it symmetrically. So in this case, I have two segments, and notice that my original edge is still here, and it is still on the UV seam. So if I had something like 3 segments, I will lose that edge. I mean, I'm not going to lose it, but what's going to happen is I'm going to have 2 hard edges here, or depending on, you know, what fraction setting I have here, then I might have actually even bigger problems, because I may need to create another edge here if I want to have my UV seams go along. So if I go ahead and take a look at my UV seams now, you will notice quickly that I still have a hard edge here, but my UV seam is gonna fall like all the way up here. And that's not what you want, so you really want to dial this down. Like, whoa. Come on then. There we go. 3, 2, 2 or 4. Notice that on every even number, you get the seam on the correct place. So 4, 6, 8, anything that's divisible by 2 should work. I like to use 2 or 4. You don't need to go too gung-ho when it comes to beveling. So make sure to do that. Now, ideally, you'd probably want to use a subdivision proxy for this so that you don't, you know, alter your original mesh. So perhaps you would grab something like, I'm going to turn this off for a second. So maybe you would grab something like this, and then you would subdivide proxy and just move it on the side. And as you can see, it's identical. I don't have any subdivisions on it, right? But the fact of the matter is that if I decide to do something like, actually, let me just Control Z this. I'm going to undo all of that stuff so that I don't have my bevel here. So there's my bevel gone. And now what I'm going to do is basically do the same thing and subdivide proxy. Let me just see the settings here. No subdivision levels. I don't want any. I think you could have them at 0. I'm not sure. Emily Clark, propagate UV corners. We don't really need UVs on this. Actually, no, yeah, we do. So you need to do the UVs. Smooth triangles, no need. Mirror behavior, no need. Proxy shader, no need. Keep, so we need to keep it. So smooth this thing and move it out of the way. So now you've got 2 objects, and if you take a look at your channel box, you've got one is an input, which is our smooth proxy, and this is our original. It actually gives you the output. So anything we do on this object should be reflected on this one, but not vice versa. Therefore, if you wanted to bevel something, you should bevel it over here like this. So this is our edge, and I will bevel it now. Whoa. Well, that is unfortunate. I was under the impression that this was possible. At any rate, well, it's still useful to have a subdivision proxy anyway, so if I were to grab this and then I could bevel it out, you will still see the result over here. The reason, technically the reason the proxy exists is so that you could see how your level of detail will be working after you subdivide, and you'll be able to work on a much lower poly mesh. And let's say grab this edge over here and scale this out, and you will see that, you know, you'll see your results in the subdivision proxy. I was really under the impression you could work on your subdiv proxy this way, but perhaps, like, I don't know, if you delete the history, then this shouldn't be a real issue. So yeah, you can now grab something like this and bevel it. However, this is undesirable due to the simple fact that you got so many faces to work with here that it's just unreasonable to be working on such a mesh. This should be your final product. So in this case, this is some kind of a basket or something. I don't even know this. Whatever it is, right? Whatever it is you make, and use the subdiv proxy just to see what are you doing. Obviously, it's pretty much the same as having a cage like this. So this is like pressing 2 on your keyboard. Anyway, what I wanted to conclude this with this is the fact that once you start subdividing, by the way, there's another option here. So I'm starting to think if I should create another video for this or go with this one. No, I'll go with this one. All right, so that is it with UVs anyway when it comes to hard and soft edges. Now next we're going to work on topology. And actually I should not have deleted the history on that thing because I really do want to show you the bit with the topology. So here it is. Notice that our proxy is nicely smooth and we have this cap over here. Now, whenever you're in a condition, in a situation where you're working on a hard surface, and you need to make something like a hole, and you're thinking, man, should I use a Boolean? But like a Boolean is going to screw up all of my topology, right? It's going to be a big issue. Now, for hard surfaces, it actually is not that much of an issue. Okay, so if I go ahead over here and grab this, grab these faces over here, just this whole object really, and I go into my, well, in this case actually it doesn't really matter, but let's go ahead, let's say I'm going to grab this whole ring and I'm going to subdivide this. So I'm going to smooth. Where's my smooth? I believe it's somewhere here. Where's my smooth? Oh, there we go. For some reason, this one lost its picture. So I'm going to smooth these faces, and I'm going to keep smoothing them and smoothing them and smoothing them. And Maya is starting to tank, obviously. However, if I go ahead and just turn on my soft select and select this here and just go ahead and maybe raise something like this and just raise this up. Come on, boy. You got this. Notice that you start getting these artifacts here on the shading, and that is due to the fact that you got too many triangles, too close, too much of a problem to deal with. In other words, your smoothing is not going to look good, okay? And that is just on this tip. Obviously, if you have something different, you're still going to run into this issue, like a cylinder, for example. Like, I probably should have shown this on this other side, but whatever. So that's why usually you would be quad capping your cylinders. However, there's one more thing you could do. Another option in this situation would be, let me just undo all of this stuff here that I've done. Right, so I believe I'm done with everything here, am I? No, there still does seem like a small issue, but whatever. What I wanted to show you is the fact that you can safely delete this, delete these vertices and these edges, and you will still be completely fine. So I'm going to grab all of these edges here. I'm going to grab all of that, and basically I'm going to control delete them. If I actually missed one. So I'm going to control delete this one, and notice that now I'm having a problem over here, but that is only because I decided to have such a huge engon of a face, all right, and also because I'm pretty much smoothing. In hard surfaces, most of the time you wouldn't be really smoothing. All right, so that shouldn't really be an issue in many situations. So you could grab this face, for example, and let's say you're gonna extrude it in, and this will pretty much sort your problem out. Now you still have an engon, right? Notice that you still have an engon, but the reason why this is not screwing up your smoothing is because this is a flat surface. And that is why hard surfaces can get away with things like having a massive engon or a lot of triangles or anything that, as long as it is smooth, as long as it's on one plane, right, completely flat, planar, you're not going to have an issue when you start smoothing. Because imagine if you had like 1,000 of these edges, or not 1,000, obviously nobody would be working with anything like that. But if you used Boolean, and Boolean created some very nice shape for you, some very nice looking cutout, and at the end of the day you're thinking, Jesus Christ, I got like 50 different edges I need to start connecting, and you'll end up connecting them all the way to the other side of your topology of your object. And essentially, in order just to solve this one n-gon, you may have to actually go ahead and create maybe 2,000 to 3,000 faces, because your edge loops will be running across the whole object. Now obviously you could utilize topology techniques where you can have one vertex be the hub of 5 edges instead of 4. You could be collapsing these together as such. But at the end of the day, it is always best, whenever possible, whenever you see the ability that whenever you smooth your object, there's no issue with it, such as here, just stick with an n-gon. Because the time investment required to fix this n-gon, well, this particular n-gon is easy to fix, but even so, in most cases, you're not going to have such a perfectly easy solution. Sometimes you might have some weird shape, especially on weapons, guns, etc., when they got these strange shapes at the front, at the back, right? On the trigger, right, you need more edges on the side just so that it's bent like nicely, but you don't need that many on the other side. So whenever you can get away with an n-gon, feel free to get away. However, that is not like an automatic thing saying, dude, you can just go nuts and ignore topology, because after all, you still need to have your selections available to you. And it's a bad idea to ignore topology altogether, especially when doing hard surfaces, because some of the times you need to have particular selection sets. This goes, by the way, same goes for triangles. Triangles are acceptable in like very rarely are acceptable in deforming meshes. For example, at tips such as tail tips or teeth, or I don't know, sharp claws, whatever, right? These are very sharp objects that will not be deforming, right? They're just there. And as such, you're really not going to be, like, you're going to be fine if you use a if you use a triangle, right? Nothing's going to kill it. Obviously, you could go ahead and try to create your little quad cap at the top, or maybe have a quad topology because it's like 4-sided or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's not a big deal if you have a couple of triangles on your mesh. All right, the important bit to remember is that your topology only matters when you're either subdividing, such as here, notice what happens here, or whenever you are deforming. In this case, if I were to deform this would not deform well at all, because there's no vertices here to deform. All right, this is going to be just a flat piece. But because this is not going to deform, and it's just the top of a basket or something, right? You just, like, I don't know, add a handle to it and just pick it off. This means that it's not a big issue. So whenever you're doing your topology, just think about it this way, okay? Is this going to be a stationary object that's never going to be changed? If the answer is yes, then go nuts. Well, don't go nuts, but feel free to ignore a couple of cases where it's basically much more logical to abandon a particular area, right? And in favor of of speed. That is not to, and by the way, optimization, because look, at the end of the day, if I grab this object over here and I triangulate it, at the end of the day, everything will turn into triangles anyway, okay? Like, the reason we use quads is so that you can see better, right? This is not as easily readable as quads. Like, this is much easier to read. Obviously, now that I did triangulate this, my smooth mesh poly is going nuts. So obviously, you don't triangulate your smooth poly, right? So that's one thing you want to do. But obviously, it's possible to quadrangulate it, but I'm really not sure if this is a good algorithm. Oh wow, it did it soundly, almost. See, there's always issues when you try to quadrangulate. But then again, this is trying to create quads, and as such, it did succeed. So you will notice that, yes, it did kind of even solve my issue. Not to mention that there's other techniques you could employ, such as fix n-gon faces by basically tessellation, then you can quadrangulate it. Anyway, I'm starting to get off topic here. What I wanted to say about topology as well is the fact that no matter what, like notice we've got however many faces here, and there's no difference on the side. I mean, topologically there is, but in reality, there really isn't that many issues with this object per se. The only difference is that obviously all of them collide in the middle. You could grab this vertex and maybe put in the middle, right, and just recreate this edge loop. But that's all about topology. I just wanted to make sure that you guys don't go completely nuts on topology and completely abandon, well, what you're working on. Because at the end of the day, like I said, if it's something like a tennis racket or, oh, I don't know, a ping pong racket or any type of like a golf club, like a sword, right? Anything that does not deform, you can get away with triangles and n-gons quite soundly. Obviously, not everywhere, but you will learn this as you go along. You will see that you get particular problems when you deform. In general, as long as it's a flat surface, you can get away with everything. Okay. Obviously, you need to create a supporting loop because, like in my case, if you remember correctly, there was an issue before I added this loop. Okay, that being said, we're done with the UVs. We're done with the topology. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the pipeline that we're going to be working on. Like I said, I will explain how the pipeline with Painter and Designer will work. But what I wanted to kind of insert here is the fact that you can also use Mudbox. Now, Mudbox is very simple to learn because, first of all, it has the same tool set as the sculpting bit. So if we go ahead into Mesh Tools and we go into Sculpting Tools, this is pretty much ripped out almost directly from Mudbox, right? All these tools here are the same, and they even have almost the same settings. So if I grab, let's say, I don't know, the Sculpt tool, right? And I go into my tool settings, you will notice that I have my stamp, my stylus, right? These are things basically that, like, you can grab an alpha image, for example, and drop it off here. I don't know if there's a picking stamp here. Yeah, there's plenty of stamps. So these are the same stamps available to you in Mudbox, by the way. So I don't know, let's say I grab something like this, and then I just decide to sculpt with this. Now, obviously, there are absolutely no faces for me to work with here. So let's go ahead, tell you what, let's go ahead and subdivide this sucker into, I don't know, just smooth. Oh, now smooth, all of a sudden smooth came back. So that's very nice. I'm going to smooth this boy, and I'm going to smooth him quite heavily. Notice that our smooth is not that good because of our topology, initial topology. But, it's fine. So currently, my object has how many polygons? 12,000 polygons. I'm going to go even higher and subdivide this into 5. Okay, we're all the way up to 51,000. And I'm going to subdivide this all the way to 6. 200,000. And maybe I could go ahead and subdivide into 7, but I'm going to do this later for your satisfaction, obviously. Now, first of all, I'm going to duplicate this guy so that I can subdivide him later. And we're going to work on this dude. So let's go ahead and grab our, I don't know, Sculpt tool. Let's grab the Sculpt tool. And this is all turning into a very nice, ready to model mesh. And I'm going to use the stencil. So this is my stamp, and I'm basically using my stamp, and here I am adding detail to my object. Now, currently, like I said, this is a high poly object, so it's got how many? What was it? 200,000 polygons, right? So there's quite a lot of polygons for Maya, at least for one object when it comes. So I'm doing my little painting here. Obviously, you can you can increase the brush size and then obviously increase the magnitude. Let's say I want to do something really drastic like this, right? And notice that I'm creating some really fancy things. This is pretty much the same as Mudbox. Mudbox works in a very similar manner. Obviously, you have your symmetry and all of that jazz, and you can use these different tools such as, I don't know, foamy tool, for example. You can still use, well, this is a very strong tool, but you can still use your different stamps. You could also use a stylus, sorry, not a stylus, but, oh wow, they don't have stamps. They don't have stencils. So that's nice, I suppose. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you're doing here is not going to be on the same level as a Mudbox thing because Maya really tanks once you start adding subdivisions. Like, it's not good at subdividing, actually. Past a couple of thousand, like 200, 300,000 polygons, it really starts to tank. And I will prove it to you right now if I decide to smooth this thing. So let's go ahead and I'm going to grab this object. I'm just going to press 3. And it's even going to give me a warning saying, dude, listen, you know, you're going to fucking kill me. So there we go. I'm going to press yes, and it's going to subdivide it. And this is how, oh wait, it's still subdividing. It's exactly what I'm talking about. Maya is really tanking right now because I'm asking it to do something really serious. I mean, currently it's at 3,000 polygon, 3 million polygons, right? Now, obviously, I got a lot of detail out of those 3 million polygons. That is absolutely true. I could even perhaps subdivide this again. And it's going to smooth this again just once, and it's going to take its own little set. So there we go. I've smoothed it once, and if I decide to smooth it again, this video is not going to end because I'm going to have to wait half a year for this thing to happen. That's not because my machine is slow, by the way. I have a very fast machine. It's just that the way Maya is made, it is not very good at subdividing. Okay, so that's what you end up with. Obviously, this currently is 8 million polygons. You could definitely make it work, right? I mean, whatever you're working on, you could start, let's say, grabbing some, I don't know, go with the flatten tool, right? And just start to flatten things. So something like this, and just flatten this out. Obviously, this is not strong enough, so I need to increase the magnitude a wee bit and more. Okay, quite a lot. Okay, more. Yeah, now we're flattening. So as you can see, you can definitely work with this. It's not bad, but you could also go ahead and do this in Mudbox, which is a much better sculpting tool, because in reality is, if I decide to undo this right now, if I decide to undo my strokes and I say, oh, listen, I'm not a big fan of this, or let's say I tried another stencil and I think, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and try to use, I don't know, something like scales or leaves or veins. Let's say I'm going to make a veiny type object, and I decide to, well, not with a freaking, I don't know, let's try the wax tool. Let's see where the wax is. There we go, that's the wax tool. I picked the same stamp, so let's say I pick the stamp here. Really, bro? There we go. So if I decide to do that and I start stamping down, you will notice that I'm doing so on top of this detail over here. And obviously this is not the best. I mean, there's issues here. I probably should edit some of my settings, such as you could probably randomize this, right? Maybe not. But there's not a lot of settings here, really, right? You've got your build up, but there's not a lot of distance. Like if you try to have a distance between these two strokes, you probably have to be stamping like once and twice and thrice. Yeah, I don't see any settings here for that. Yes, unfortunately there isn't one. So that's one of the limitations. The second one is, unlike in Maya, in Mudbox, this is actually going to be happening on a separate layer, so you can disable it, enable it, obviously such as this layer stack here, but in Mudbox it's going to be a much more approachable and easy to understand solution. Okay, not to mention that it's got a lot of other stuff as well. So yeah, this is, and obviously it's starting to slow down once you start really holding in all the painting. The reason for this, by the way, is because Maya is kind of like a Frankenstein between every software out there. Autodesk has been devouring lesser companies like Softimage, the guys who developed Softimage, and like others. Mudbox was also a separate company before that. The guys who developed Mudbox, but Autodesk essentially devoured them all and started adding tools to Maya that, you know, were present in other applications. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why Maya is such a clusterfuck, technically speaking, because there's just so many ways to do the same thing, right? Example being, let's say, oh, okay, I'm going to delete you because you're starting to annoy me. Example being, if I go ahead and focus on this, and let's say I want to add an edge loop. Now, how many ways do I have to add an edge loop? Well, first of all, there's obviously the, if I go into edge mode and I grab these edges here, right? I could go ahead and, I don't know, maybe I could connect components. So there's my edge over here. If I connected these components, that's one way. Another way would be to go into multi-cut and just add an edge whenever I want, right? So I can have one here and I have one here. Another way would be to, I don't know, insert an edge loop here. So if I grab this edge, and there you go, I got a bunch of edge loops. That's method number 3. What else could I do? If I go right click here and I try to, let's say, well, offset edge loop is not really going to do much, but it's got a separate, like it basically splits your edge in two. I mean, it kind of is, I don't know, it is kind of an insert edge loop, but it's basically like a two-sided thing. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but it is I do count it as inserting an edge loop, although it is very handy in some situations where you need to offset stuff. And obviously there's the final way using quad draw. So if I go ahead and go into quad draw, I believe there was a way to go into quad draw once I'm in multi-cut. Where are you? For some reason it disappeared. Come on then. Okay, well there is no quad draw here, but if I went into my quad draw from here, where are you? There you are. Shift Q. All right, they added a particular thing. I could again add an edge loop. Okay, so there's tons of ways to add an edge loop, and in reality, you only need one of them. Reason for this, like I said, is because as Autodesk devoured every other competitor out there, they essentially, once they add a particular feature, you don't want the Maya veterans to lose their workflow, because some people are used to simply using edge offset and insert edge loop like these two. I'm used to using multi-cut. Some others are used to connecting components. Right, you've got the connect tool, like you can go manually and start connecting these together, and maybe these and these, and like this is a fifth way to do it, by the way, because this has got a tool essentially. So all these things, right? You can, let's say, enter here and then, oops, and then go back into your tool and just select a particular one with a preview. So you got all these basic, tools that do the same thing but are multiple. And like I said, they're designed for people who are coming in from the devoured software to be able to use them, and who already use Maya to be able to use them. All right. That's why Maya is kind of messy when it comes to performance. It crashes a lot, and I mean, you probably noticed that already, given the amount of time you spent with Maya, presumably, throughout this video series. But yeah, and that's why you might want to go into Mudbox. Not only that, but Mudbox actually can do quite solid texture painting. It's not as good, not as procedural and robust as the Painter or the Substance, but there's a significant difference in price. Mudbox is only $10 a month, whereas Substance Live is, I believe, 20 or 15. It's not as significant, but the Substance Live is $15 a month. So I don't know. It's up to you. Obviously, Painter or Designer, they cannot model. So ideally, you would be using Mudbox for your creatures to do such operations, such as a sculpting here. We're using different alphas. It also supports vector displacement maps, which is a huge time saver. I might go over Mudbox with you guys maybe for the worm. Yeah, I will go over it. We're gonna export the worm because we're gonna have to redo the UVs anyway. That's where I'm gonna show you how you can transfer attributes between objects, and that is after that we're gonna be preparing our model for export to Painter and Designer, and then we're gonna go into that. All right. So I just wanted to make it clear to you guys that, so you don't end up wasting your time. I mean, you played around with UVs, with your UVs for now, but chances are they're not that good anyway. So ideally, you want to be redoing them in such a way that your hard edges are always your UV shells. So if I go ahead and take a look now at my UV editor, and this is the object that I have, currently I've got a lot of hard edges here which are not on the seam. For example, these ones. These are hard edges and not on the seam. Now obviously they don't have to be, right? But it's definitely something that would be nice to do. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. There's not much else I can tell you. If you really want to sculpt, now this is definitely an acceptable thing to do, but by the way, don't try to UV the high definition meshes, because it's gonna be like, I mean, look at how close you need to go, and then just you gotta grab this. No, just don't do it, right? UV your low poly mesh and just keep it UV'd. because that is the most important bit when it comes to the maps. Okay. When it comes to heavy, like the high poly, you don't need UVs on it. Anyway, that's it. That's it. If I recommend you check out Mudbox, even you know, even if I don't end up doing these tutorials, because like I said, Mudbox is a subdivision beast. It will essentially keep subdividing until your machine burns. Okay. The only, like, the ceiling of subdivisions that Mudbox can support is only the ceiling of your processing power. Okay. The moment your CPU starts tanking, or GPU, or whatever, whichever one, like, or both start tanking, that's when Mudbox will start tanking as well. Right. It's not a coding issue. Whereas in here, most of the, like, if I try to subdivide this, let's just go ahead and try to subdivide this. Let's say I'm going to subdivide this 10 times. So I'm going to smooth this, edit mesh, no, sorry, mesh. Smooth this, and I'm going to subdivide this twice, right? So we got what? We got 2 million polygons, 200,000 polygons. I want to subdivide this twice. So this is going to be 8 million, right? Let's do this 3 times. So 16 million polygons if this happens, right? Or you want to go for 32, let's go for 32. 32 million polygons, let's see what happens. Now, I know for a fact that Mudbox can handle that. I don't know about here. Let's go smooth, and I most likely just froze Maya. Let's see. Currently, I'm not seeing any progress. It might. Look, given enough sufficient time, it might, but I guarantee you working with them is going to be a pain, because like I said, there's a lot of, like, Maya is not built for this. All right. The reason these grab like these sculpting tools exist here is for blending meshes, blending shapes, such as raising an eyebrow, or blinking, or I don't know, whatever, flapping your mouth, whatever it is. That's why it's here. So please just don't go nuts with your smooth options, and make sure your topology and your UVs are on point. All right. Now, I'm not going to wait for this to compute, because it's ridiculous. And I'm going to see you guys next time when we start our model preparation for either Mudbox or Painter. I'm not sure yet. All right. Bye-bye.